Hello everyone. Welcome back to the movie recap. Spoiler ahead, watch out and subscribe to our channel. The movie starts in 16th century when siblings Anne, Mary, and George enjoy carefree moments together. Their father Sir Thomas Bullen tells their mother, Elizabeth, that he has arranged Mary's marriage to a guy named William Carey. He believes Anne, the more intelligent sibling, can secure a much better match. Years later, Mary prepares for her wedding day with her siblings. Mary's wedding is a celebration. Meanwhile, as the Queen has failed to produce a male heir to the English throne, the Duke of Norfolk sees an opportunity in the King's distress and makes a plan with Anne's father to further their own political ambitions. Anne's father proposes Anne to be a mistress and a potential mother of the King's son. The Duke of Norfolk tells her she could bring immense wealth and societal position to their family. They ask her to be preparing for her first wedding night with the King. Their family will gain the King's favor if Anne can please the King, Henry. Later, Anne's father shares his plan with his wife Elizabeth, revealing that Henry will visit their home in a few months. Anne's mother is not fond of the idea, as it would be expensive to prepare their home for the royal visit, and Anne's name could be tarnished. However, he does not share his wife's concerns and remains optimistic about the plan. The day after the wedding, Mary opened up to her sister and shared the private details of her wedding night, and they both kept the secret between them. Several months later, King Henry arrived with his grand entourage, and the entire village was excited. Anne and Mary were introduced to the King, and during a lavish banquet, and sat next to Henry. Their father reminds Anne of the importance of leaving a good impression. One day Henry and his company go hunting with Anne. That causes Anne's father to become anxious. Meanwhile, the servant of the Bullen family informed them King had fallen and was wounded. King is cared for by Mary, who surprises him with her beauty. Mary is appointed a maid of honor to the Queen, which she protests, but her husband agrees by the influence of the Duke of Norfolk. Mary's sister holds a grudge against her for supposedly trying to win the King's attention. When they arrive at the royal court, the new ladies-in-waiting are introduced to the Queen, Catherine of Aragon. Upon seeing this, Catherine realizes that her husband is interested in Mary and clarifies that she is not welcomed here. After a while, Mary encounters Jane Parker, who encourages her not to bear a grudge against the Queen. Jane explains that the Queen has a good heart but is upset due to her husband's infidelity. That evening, a magnificent ball is held at the palace, and Jane keeps a watchful eye on George, who doesn't seem to like her much. The King approaches Mary and whispers that he wants to see her that night after the ball. A maid escorts Mary to the King's chambers, where Henry expresses his affection for her and says she seems sincere and honest. They spend some quality time together. Mary meets her father and uncle, who question her about her relationship with the King. The Duke of Norfolk believes that if Mary has a boy, it will be a great victory since the Queen is unlikely to have a son. And leaves the palace secretly and plans to marry Henry Percy, but it falls through when they realize Percy is already engaged. Mary informs her father, who keeps the situation confidential. They decide Henry will marry the girl with whom it was decided and will stay in French court as long as she becomes wise up. Suddenly Mary falls sick, and the King is thrilled when he finds out she is pregnant. Meanwhile, George is unhappy about his marriage to Jane Parker, and Anne's mother is unsatisfied with their newfound status as it's too shaky. Mary is advised to rest completely to ensure a healthy pregnancy, and the Duke of Norfolk seeks a way to keep the King close. Thomas believes it is time to return and from her exile. The mother sends a letter to her daughter and soon arrives back in England at the Cuts to royal court, where she impresses everyone with her intelligence and charisma, earning the admiration of both courtiers and the King. Mary fears her sister's return, and Jane demands George. The King becomes entertained by Jane's intelligence and loses interest in Mary. And refuses a gift from the King, which insults him. And clarifies Mary about her intentions for her ambitions. Just then she gets another gift from the King and then declines that, enraging him. King asks her why she refuses him, where she explains she can't betray her sister by taking the gift from him. Mary enters labor, and the King asks Anne for an opportunity while she gives birth to a boy. He does not even glance at his newborn son and leaves feeling victorious as Mary cries. The Duke of Norfolk is livid and feels their plan has been destroyed. And tells them that the birth of the illegitimate child means nothing and wishes for Mary and her baby to make a Rockford comeback. Anne's mother thinks that she should inform her sister in person, and she does so. And also states her ambition to become the Queen of England and have lawful children with Henry. and thinks love is meaningless without power and position and that personal ambition should always come first. Mary is getting ready to leave for the countryside while the king spends time with Anne. Catherine of Aragon observes from the window and is unhappy with what Henry has done for her, and says there can be nothing between them as long as Catherine holds the title of queen. Henry instructs his courtiers to find a reason to get rid of Catherine. He intends to send Catherine to a nunnery, but that is not enough for Anne because Catherine would still be the king's lawful wife, and wants him to cut off his marriage to the queen and marry her instead. One day, Thomas storms into Anne's chambers, angrily, and says Henry Percy's fiancée has learned about his secret marriage to Anne and has cancelled the engagement. The news of Anne and Henry Percy reaches the king, and now he wants nothing to do with her. The only person in the Boleyn family that he trusts and will listen to is Mary. Mary assures Henry that he can trust her completely and reconciles with her sister Anne, agreeing to stay with her at the palace. Meanwhile, the trial for Catherine of Aragon is underway, and Catherine holds her head high with dignity despite her humiliation. Henry's passion clouds his judgment, forcing Anne to fulfill her promise before marriage. Anne's coronation ceremony occurs, and she becomes the Queen of England. After a few days Anne gives birth to a girl that disappoints the king again. Anne's marriage is falling apart, and she becomes pregnant again, hoping to bear a son for the king. Anne wakes up in pain one night and tells the servants she had a bad dream. However, she actually loses the baby and informs her brother and sister. If the king finds out, he will label Anne a witch, so she feels she has to become pregnant at any cost. She asks George for help, but her request takes him aback. Despite this, the sister is very determined. Mary is stunned and quickly leaves the situation. Jane is surprised to find her husband with Anne, while George cannot complete his task. Mary hurries back to Rochford. The next morning, Jane goes to the king and tells everything about Anne and George. King asks Anne if this is true or not, and then confesses everything. Henry accuses Anne of being a witch and has her thrown into prison by the guards. George is also arrested. King's man goes to Rochford to tell Mary what is happening, and is imprisoned for a terrible crime against morality. After a unanimous decision, George is declared guilty and escorted to the scaffold, where he prays in front of Thomas, who witnesses the execution. Despite the danger, Mary shows courage by confronting the king and pleading with him to spare Anne's life. Henry is impressed by Mary's kindness and compassion towards her sister, and he promises to show mercy to her. Mary visits her sister in the dungeon and assures her that everything will be all right soon. However, the queen is eventually taken to the scaffold to face her fate. Despite her confidence in being released, Mary receives a note from the king at the last moment, informing her that he has changed his mind about pardoning his wife. Mary has to watch as her crown, mantle, and family necklace are removed with trembling hands. The sentence is carried out just then. After this, Mary takes little Elizabeth back to Rochford with her. Later, Thomas dies in poverty 2 years later while the Duke of Norfolk is imprisoned. Mary Boleyn marries William Stafford and lives happily away from the palace for the rest of her life. As for Elizabeth, she became the Queen of England and ruled for an impressive 45 years.